You are joining IFTF's webinar series called Foresight Talks. And today we're going to hear from Ryoko Imai from Hitachi. And she's going to be talking about foresight and design. We'll get started in a few minutes. So for now, please add your name, introduce yourself. Tell us where in the world you're joining us from. So I'll be your host. My name is Rod Falcon. I'm a research director at IFTF, and I'm calling from Northern California in a town in the Central Valley called Tracy. Ooh, we got Toronto, DC, Chicago. We have another futurist and designer. We have Austin, Texas. Great. Welcome, Switzerland and London. That's great. And Germany, Portugal, and Ukraine. Yes. All right, we're going to give you one more task before we get started. One of the things that we'd like to do is have you answer a question. And in a moment, I'm just going to put up a poll. A lot of our work at IFTF is really in service of helping you, foresight practitioners, and your organizations become future ready. And I think when we start conversations like this, it's always important to just calibrate kind of where you're at. So pick one of these statements that best describes your organization when you think about whether or not it's future ready. Let's see what the distribution is in our virtual room today. Right, I think responses are still coming in. And it slowed down. So you can see the different choices, everything from resisting change to reacting to changes on a longer term horizon, but still being challenged and sometimes blindsided, to anticipating the future, building strategic foresight capacity, but still limited. And then those that are really saying, we're ready for the future. We're manifesting our preferred future. Let's end the poll there. And Kyoko, before we get started, any comments? How would you have answered, or how do you answer this question?
Yeah, I think I would have had a hard time with this. I think I see all of them in different sections of our organization.
That's right.
Yeah, I think people move at different speed, and I definitely see evidence of all four of them. But really interesting distribution. I thought there might be more. I thought it would be like top heavy, but it's like the middle.
Definitely. All right. Let me go through a few slides before we jump into our conversation today. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat and add that in. Make sure that you're selecting everyone so that we get to see what you're sharing. And our agenda today, in a moment, we'll introduce you to our guest today. And after that, we're going to have a conversation. I'll be asking a few questions, and then we'll open it up to you. And we'll ask you to jot down those questions in chat so that Aicha will be organizing those in the background. So for those of you that don't know the Institute for the Future, we're an independent public interest organization founded in 1968. We're based in Silicon Valley in Palo Alto. And our mission has always been to help people and organizations and leaders become future ready. And we do this by providing practical tools, research, and programs to help people work with foresight to identify critical new insights that ultimately lead to better decisions in the present. We have a pretty extensive training portfolio where people all over the world are learning our methodologies and tools. We have a whole series focused on individuals spanning sort of our signature tools across Foresight, Insight Action, to courses focused on design and futures and scenario building. And we have a recent offering on AI and really learning about 3 horizons of AI. You can also find our resources on Coursera, and we do custom trainings and accelerators for leaders inside organizations. We have a bunch of trainings coming up. You'll receive this in a follow-up email, but there's a lot happening in the first quarter, so we want to make sure that you're aware of that. And you're part of our community. This is one of many resources that we create to bring this community of Foresight practitioners together, and you can access and join all of these. If you're not part of our newsletters, please sign up. It's a great way to learn more about what we're up to and what we're putting and sharing out in the community. For those of you that are part of organizations, we also have a program called IFTF Vantage, and we'll put a link to share more about that with you. Our guest speaker today is Ryoko Imai. Let me tell you a little bit about her, and then I'll ask her to say more. Ryoko works at Hitachi in the design lab. She is a social scientist with an interdisciplinary background with expertise in cognitive psychology and cultural anthropology. And her research really sits at the intersection of technology and society for a whole range of Hitachi industries. Her specialization is in organizational culture, ethical and inclusive AI, and futures thinking. Welcome, Ryoko. We're really looking forward to our conversation together. So,
yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so to get started, tell us more about who you are, tell us about your journey coming into futures thinking, and more about your role at Hitachi, just as a way for us to get started.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am a social scientist. I have a background in cultural anthropology and cognitive psychology. I've been working as a social scientist, design researcher, ethnographer in that capacity at Hitachi for now 12 years. I've been part of a design lab this whole time, and design lab in Hitachi is part of an R&D, which is a big community within Hitachi itself. As you mentioned, I have done a lot of different research in many different sectors. My work is very industry agnostic and technology agnostic. So anything from mining to healthcare to data management to energy, rail, everything.
That's really great.
So yeah, it's really fun to do a lot of different stuff. Yeah, and I've been doing Foresight work for, I was counting this morning, I guess like 8 years now. So a long time, I guess. Yeah, I've been a Foresight practitioner for about 8 years. And in terms of my journey to get there, yeah, so I became really interested in ethical technologies back in 2015. I don't know if any of you remember, there was this hashtag that was trending at the time called Airbnb While Black, where people of color were posting stories about their experience on Airbnb. Essentially, basically, they were saying that they were having experience of, their reservation abruptly being canceled or their requests for reservations being declined on a platform. And I got really interested in this because that was my first experience of seeing something where there was a critique of a digital platform, a design of a digital platform for not minimizing social bias. So I became really interested in this topic, and I started thinking about, I guess, like a speculative design or this hypothetical future where, what if we have a future where we have like a technology ethics audit someday, where we're all supposed to, required by law, for example, to consider social biases in every technology that we create. So I started spreading that word and started talking to people and came across futures thinking. And that was my first experience with it. And as it turns out, futures thinking is not new. In Hitachi, there was a group of Hitachi designers in Japan who was developing forecasting technique back in 2005 and 6-ish. So it already existed. This was called kizashi, which is a Japanese word for emerging signs. And they already had this kind of, process and material that they
That
were
emerging
working.
signs, right?
Yeah, emerging signs, kizashi.
Uh-huh.
So I started looking into it deeper. I thought it was really interesting practice. And, thanks to Google, I found Institute for the Future also back in 2015. And I learned that you guys did workshops and introductory workshops. So I took that workshop for 3 days and learned some of the basic tools and frameworks and methodologies from you guys 8 years ago. So essentially after that, I took all these inspirations with me and decided to revise a little bit of what existed as a foresight practice internally and turned it into a slightly different practice within Hitachi. It's essentially a combination of many different things, but we have, published material on foresight, stories about the futures, guide for, navigating conversation with customers about futures. I will say it's been a long experiment for me, 8 years running. And I think it's fair to say the world has changed so much as well in the last 8 years. So it's still ongoing. It continues.
Very interesting. Can you say a little bit more about kizashi? And you were saying you obviously have thought about it and evolved the practice at Hitachi, but
Right.
give us a sense of like what it was and how you've evolved it, because I think that would be really interesting to hear more about. And the fact that you said that it means emerging signs, and as you know, looking for signals is core to futures thinking.
Practice, right? Yeah, so kizashi, that was developed in early 2000. From my experience of reading through it and reviewing it, essentially it was a collaborative process with university students and university professors. And they were developing separate set of kizashis in different regions. So they had a booklet for China, Brazil, Indonesia, Japan, stuff like that. I think you mentioning about, kizashi, the concept of signs is on target because they were really focused on the signs themselves. So what were emerging at the time in that particular region was what was highlighted, right? So sometimes the mix of signs that they were talking about would vary from year to year and region to region, depending. So sometimes they'll have a lot of different themes around sustainability. Sometimes they'll have a lot of different themes about, generational gap. Of course, we are, a technology company, so there's a lot of conversations about emerging technologies. Another thing that I noticed about kizashi was that it was, at the end of the day, written from and for a Japanese business perspective. So what I noticed, in, say, Indonesian content, for example, there will be a lot of stories and insights about Islamic ideas in Indonesia, whereas you wouldn't see anything about Buddhism or Shintoism in Japan because it was, written from Japanese perspective. And I wanted to revise that a little bit. So what I did was, rather than just sort of seeing what is emerging that year in that region, I wanted to try at understanding a much more systemic and interconnected vision of a society, a future society. So in my early days of experimentation, I essentially started to research into, this question of what are a set of really foundational themes that we should be looking at when we're doing foresight, whether you're doing it in Indonesia or Europe or Japan or wherever.
Yeah.
So I came up with this 20 to 25, what I called existential themes of modern human life. And those are basically foundational things. So, transportation, healthcare, education, mortality, food, those are basic things that make up society. And so I developed it into a much more kind of a structured and repeatable process of looking at signs and sorting signs based on those categories so that we can get a much more, kind of a rich picture of what society could look like. And at the time, and it still is, but I think it's quite counter to the kind of the conventional ways of thinking about innovation, at least within our company, because like I said, we are a technology company and we do have a very strong engineering culture where we tend to center technologies. So I was bringing this tool to talk about, hey, like maybe we should consider realms outside of technologies. And from my perspective, I think when you're thinking about, say, especially ethics, you're going to have to expand beyond technologies to think about the implications. Right. So I really wanted to make sure to capture a big picture.
That's really great. It really makes me think of when you say foundational aspects or dynamics of a society, in some ways, those are things that aren't necessarily changing very fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's counterintuitive or counter to the work of science where you're really looking at what's changing right now. But going back to your, the example that you started off with Airbnb, it's a great example of why you want to bring those two together. So I really like that. We often look at, we often in our practice are using STEEP to make sure we're looking at broad drivers or future forces as a way to make sure, to keep us honest, to make sure that we're looking at a wide range of possibility. But I love this concept of foundational, these, what did you say? Foundational
elements or themes.
Because there are a range of things that aren't moving as fast, but they're certainly either going to constrain or enable any new innovations that are on the horizon.
And they should always be, this year we have a category called foundational technology. And this year, for sure, I think that would go to ChatGPT. But, we can think about the implication of a given technology in many different aspects of our lives, always, right? And like you said, STEEP analysis, I think if we just kind of let it organically happen, there's a tendency to over-focus on technology category and also industry category. So it's our way to kind of expand beyond that.
So you talked about, trying to create a more integrated approach by doing these foundational elements. I know in our previous conversations, you also talked about part of your practice is also moving towards alignment internally. I'm wondering if you could talk about that and
absolutely.
How do you do that and why is it important to your practice?
Yeah, so the alignment is kind of a happy accident of foresight. I think initially when I first started doing this foresight work, I was thinking, well, this would be really great. This can be like formalized into our innovation process and like baked into innovation culture in Hitachi and all of that. And so I had all these like big dream of having this be a very standard practice within our organization. The alignment came through years of experience. So it turns out that foresight is just such an incredible tool for activating alignment among stakeholders. So when you get a room of stakeholders together, it's rarely the case, it's almost never the case that they naturally happen to be aligned on all the assumptions. I think that future is such a powerful tool, more powerful than the concept of the present, for highlighting a lot of hidden assumptions that a lot of people are making. And that has been really incredible in terms of even just doing non-foresight design workshop of some kind. I think the concept of future can be really effective in highlighting those things. And those are conversations that a lot of people didn't realize they needed to have in the first place, right? Yeah. For example, I had an experience of working with this insurance company, for example, where they were talking about the future of end-of-life planning, like 10 years ahead. Now, some of the assumptions that they were making based on their historical experience with their services is that people liked buying insurance. So people will still buy insurance because people like insurance. And we started to unpack that a little bit and said, well, people don't like insurance. People like safety. People like stability. So the concept that we should be working with is not whether they like the services or not, but what would safety look like 10 years from now? What would stability look like 10 years from now? And what kind of generation I'll be looking at? So it really unpacked a lot of assumptions that we were making at that really foundational level. So Foresight, I find to be really incredible for that kind of discussion. And then I will say, again, the flexibility of Foresight to create a much more systemic, interconnected picture. I'm constantly trying to steer people and encourage people to step out of this kind of a technology comfort zone, an industry comfort zone, because I think those lines were blurring anyway. So I think it's a really great tool for alignment, but this has been kind of an unexpected surprising outcome of Foresight through years of experimenting with it.
Yeah, I was really curious about your experience with alignment, because I think about it as part of any futures engagement. At some point, there's the need to build some consensus view as you're thinking about the future, and that's not easy to do. So I think as a Foresight practitioner, there's of course the methodologies. You have to be a good facilitator, but then you also have to be aware of the dynamics and how you build consensus. And I think what you pointed out is a good practice of, trying to scale up and down the area you're investigating to open it up, like you were doing. I think, are we looking at insurance, or are we looking at the concept of safety and security? And sometimes by scaling up, in that case, a broader concept, you can get more participation and more exploration.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always the case that people don't want to do futures thinking to talk about the future for the sake of talking about the future. I always find that there are something that they're dealing with today that they need to address, right? So there, friction and tension and challenges in the present, that's what they're really getting at. And I think that's why future is such a great opening for deeper conversation, because you can have a very, entrenched kind of, tense context that they're working with, and they might be a lot of disagreement and misalignment today, but a lot of them, agree on the kind of future that they want. So future provides a really great opportunity to get into that conversation and really get at, like, what is it, like, why is it that you want to engage with the concept of future to begin with? And that's what I'm here to do, right? Ultimately, I'm not here to just talk about the future for the fun of it. I'm here to talk about the present through talking about the future, using the concept of future.
Such an important point and reminder. I think what oftentimes I get asked, or people make the assumption that we're kind of only thinking about 10 years out, but thinking about the future is so connected to the present. It's not detached. And so that's such an important point to underline. To that point, I think it would be interesting if you tell us a little bit more about your practice of Foresight with design. You're in a design lab. So tell us how that comes.
I am in the design lab. Yeah. So to be honest with you, it's an ongoing conversation. Where do you locate, and how do we locate Foresight within a bigger design business ecosystem? So that's still kind of being experimented on. But right now, I'm really happy and excited to say that it's a real mix. We have really leaned at the beginning, there was like, oh, this is what we call Foresight and this is what we call design, and we'll separate them. But I think over time, we've really come to lean into the blend of it. So like I said, the Foresight practice that we have published content that showcases the stories from the future. But in terms of working with our customers, incorporate a lot of the design methodologies as well. So for instance, like stakeholder maps, which is something that our designers use often with our customers. We bring in that element to talk about, well, let's use the stakeholder map to talk about and describe our current business ecosystem. Let's create multiple hypothetical business, ecosystem maps from the future based on the stories that we create. So in terms of the process, we started to really blend both of them into each other. And that's been really interesting and really fun experimentation. And I should also show you, we have a booklet with all the feature stories that you can also download off of our website if you're interested. But this, as you can see, has a lot of kind of a graphic stories from the future. A lot of design element, obviously, using this as a provocation to activate discussions and questions about the future. So yeah, the answer is that I think at the beginning we were kind of struggling with like, how do we balance those two? And we really lean into blending both approaches at the same time.
I know that you're also engaged in training others at Hitachi, and it also, I want to hear about that. But it also kind of comes back to how you answered the poll question. It really depends, because I imagine that there are different parts of Hitachi that are just getting introduced to this and some that are actually integrating it. So I'm curious, tell us more about how you're training and where is strategic foresight fitting into Hitachi? It's obviously in the design function, but yeah, give us a window into that.
Yeah, so when I teach foresight, I do it with two different audiences. So one is really using it in the context of project. So I'm working with customers or even internal groups that are interested in this approach and want to arrive at some sort of insights about the present and business strategy and their business ecosystem. Almost always the case that they want to learn how to do this on their own. So they also want to internalize this practice and learn the tools and frameworks and stuff like that. So in this domain of teaching, what we were just discussing, I think what I leverage and maximize the most is really trying to get at why are they doing foresight to begin with. I think foresight has gained a lot of traction in the last few years because of the kind of the uncertainty that got sparked with the pandemic. And I think a lot of people are interested in the like alternative approach, but this is not an approach just for the sake of approach. You want to get at, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? So I think I really put on the kind of the investigative participant observer hat to make sure that we're addressing the actual issues that they're addressing. Like I said, when I talked about alignment, some of the sort of the hidden challenges can emerge in workshop settings. So we try to make sure that we customize our workshops and our engagement with customers the best we can, so we can address those. So a lot of kind of investigative emotional intelligence, sensitivity, and attention, involved in this kind of engagement, because it's not just teaching the tool, but really teaching them how to use it effectively to their ends. Now, the other form of teaching is the teaching other people in design community to do what I do, right? Teaching them about the methodology and essentially teaching them to be comfortable working with customers using this tool. Obviously, the frameworks and tools and all that stuff, all the, incredible resource that you guys have at IFTF, those are things that are, that I share with the team. But I think the really important thing that I try to do when I'm teaching foresight internally is to teach the other things, like the other skills that you need to make sure that this is a success. So when I teach foresight, I also teach body language, reading body language. I teach listening. I teach how to mirror in a dialogue setting, how to offer validation, and also approaching questions with compassion. Because I think talking about the future is quite vulnerable for a lot of people. And those kind of emotional skills are things that are really hard to standardize. And it's something that only humans can do. So I make sure that I teach those skills going into foresight conversations.
That's really great to hear. It's not often in these conversations when we're talking about this that people have the awareness that there's these other dynamics happening
Yeah.
on in the room when you're trying to do futures work. And yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Are there other, I think that's an important lesson from your practice and experience. Are there other things that maybe are challenges or lessons that you can share with us?
Challenges. I think, you already mentioned and touched on that, but I think this notion that foresight is about prediction or, because I do foresight, I should be able to tell you exactly what to do with your business. That kind of stereotype can still get in the
Yeah.
way. So that could be a challenge. I think the other thing is, you know, us being in an R&D context as well, I think there's a little bit of pressure to also standardize this practice. So can you codify it, standardize it, almost like a Taylorism of foresight? Can you make it snappy, effective, fast, and make it available to everybody? And like I said, like
Build an algorithm to forecast the future.
exactly, can we do this in AI? So I think that can be challenging because like I said, there's a lot of interpersonal and emotional work involved in doing foresight as well, which cannot be standardized. The other thing I would mention is that I think it's really effective and helpful to bring in element of play into foresight and also embodied experiences, sensory experiences. So I try to lighten up the engagement with a lot of playful elements and sensory experiences. One time we did like a luncheon where we brought in food from the future. We did like a
Nice.
tasting of insect-based like cookies and stuff like that and talked about the future of food. I think that kind of
Edible
a sense of
futures.
play, yeah, exactly, is really important in a context, even though it feels like it's very removed from conversations about technology.
Mhm. Speaking of technology, I did want to ask about, I think you've had a recent project where you're integrating generative AI. And,
Yeah.
we, of course, are very interested in this human machine forecasting, integrating AI. And I'm curious what you're doing, what's your experience
Yeah.
working
So
out?
I'm currently working on sustainability project, future of sustainability. And for that project, we have someone in a team who's experimenting with generative AI. When we run workshop with customers, one of the very sort of embodied physical sensory experience that we offer is to create a whole bunch of little index cards with a signal printed on them, and we cover the entire wall in a workshop setting so people can spend like 20 minutes browsing through them, picking them up, and just like shuffling and like sorting and stuff. And it's part of the experience of them going in and like seeing a lot of different emerging things all at once to get them ready for a workshop. Now it's an amazing part of the workshop, but it's really labor intensive, right? Just like formatting
Yes.
the cards and stuff like that, very labor intensive. So our the person in our team has been experimenting with AI to automate some of those things. So you can essentially create those cards really quickly. And even more incredible, in my opinion, is that you can translate them all at once between Japanese and English, which is also incredible. He's also experimenting with sort of a visuals of some of the features that we're talking about. So as we are doing the workshop and talking with customers, you can create really quickly some of the images that might highlight the points that we were talking about using AI, which is great. So it's kind of supplementing and supporting foresight in that sense. But I will say that, it also creates a little bit more work on our part to curate the content exactly in a way that we need to. And, I'm also careful to,
Now you
I
have
want to be
more.
careful. You have more stuff, but the quantity and volume of stuff is not, it's not what's going to lead to high quality insight from Foresight. So we want to make sure that we're curating them just right and using them in reasonable doses to make sure that we're really getting at the actual goal, not just kind of have a bunch of stuff floating around. That's not necessarily what success looks like.
Yeah. In a moment, we're going to open it up to questions. So if you have questions, please add those to the chat. So let me ask you one more question. As reflect on your experience, and you've been doing this now, you said for 8 years or longer.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone that wants to integrate Foresight in their organization? How should they start?
Yeah. I mean, I think every organization is different and every group in an organization is different. So I think knowing that, you might have to have very different approaches to different, parts of the organization is important. One. The second thing, I would try to find community. I think there are a bunch of people who are doing really cool stuff and have a lot of different tools. I think, like even things like Three Horizons, for instance, there are a bunch of different people doing it in different ways, teaching them. And I think it's great to be part of the community that is willing to share resources and best practices and things like that. So I would definitely find your tribe. And, if you reach out to me, I will not shut up about Foresight. So anytime, if you want to find me on the internet, reach out to me. I'm open to that conversation as well. But yeah, I think those would be my recommendations.
Thank you. It looks like we have a question, a few. The first one is asking, when engaging with partners and customers, how do you balance the need for one, foresight, forecasting years into the future, and two, the need to focus on the next 2 to 3 years for a company or a partner?
That's a good question. I think typically when we say future can mean different things to different people. We've definitely come across situations where customers was talking about doing forecasting and they really meant a lot more shorter term than what we were imagining. I think the important thing is to be able to, when we do a forecasting for 10 years out, we're not just kind of connecting with the hypothetical reality of 10 years out. We're essentially trying to create a path between now and there. So in a sense, they can be inclusive of both. So, if you're interested in 2 to 3 years out, yes, we can still talk about 10 years out, and let's talk about where we are and what that path could look like 2, 5, 7, 10. So typically the conversation will go like that. But again, it's from my perspective, it's important to get at why is it that they're interested in futures thinking to begin with. Future thinking isn't going to magically turn your profit around in 2 years. That's not what it does. So I try to be mindful of what it is that they're trying to resolve in the first place. Sometimes we could maybe do like design heavy methodologies and workshops to address the 2 to 3 years out, but then create a vision for the 10 years out and connect those dots through collaborating with them. But that's how I would approach it usually.
Yeah. Great. We have another question that is asking, what concrete business impacts have you seen when using Foresight at Hitachi? They said that they heard alignment. Is there something else that you would point to?
So alignment, so I would say in different levels. So they were Foresight activities where we conducted Foresight workshop and talked about the strategies, business strategies, and mapping out the business ecosystem. Those are things that the business units then take it forward and connect with other technologies to actually materialize into the reality. In terms of internal alignment, it's much more strategic and much more organizational design based, right? So for instance, in terms of outcome at the early days of pandemic back in 2020, we actually ended up doing an internal foresight workshop together as an organization to figure out how we should work together in coming years during this crisis. And that ended up sort of defining how we might collaborate together within an organization, but also even like resource allocation and the kind of technologies and solutions that we need to be figuring out together and what different roles we may be playing within an organization. So I would say those are some of the outcomes. I would say in terms of technology and business outcome, I don't have a lot of visibility into what would happen like 5 to whatever years out. But we are operating in a much more kind of high level upstream realm. So much more strategy, internal design, internal organizational design, and also organizational culture.
You talked a lot about when you're working with someone, really trying to understand why are they interested in futures work in the first place, to try to ascertain whether this is a good application for whatever their questions are. We have a question from someone that says, how do you deal with audiences that have a very firm vision or belief about the future? At IFTF, we call these, sometimes they're official futures.
Oh, I like that. I think that's almost always the case. I think people have a very strong feelings on the concept of future. And to kind of refer back to what I was talking about earlier, I think it's important to deconstruct the assumptions that shape that future. Mm-hmm. So, we deal with industries like, if you take like automotive industry, for example, automotive industry mobility in general is shifting really quite rapidly, not just in terms of technology, but I think, social concepts of like car ownership and like ridership and all of those things are changing all at the same time. And we have, sustainability also playing into this. Now, a lot of the assumptions that people make about their business today and also in the future has to do with the historical kind of experience in the industry. So if an automotive company was operating with this idea that people are always going to see car ownership as like a sign of social status and symbol, that is just not going to happen. But it allows you to kind of think about like, what are the hidden assumptions that you're making that you think are validating this belief? Getting at that is really important. I really couldn't think of anything other than foresight to really get at those, because they are really difficult conversations to have. If you're just coming in and say, doing kind of, talking about the current business ecosystem and saying, I don't know if that's going to actually come true, that could be a really stressful conversation. Whereas I think putting us, keeping sight, way into the horizon, it allows us to then deconstruct what are the things that we are willing to let go and what are the assumptions that we need to revise going into the future. So I would really get at not so much like, don't focus too much on the belief itself, but really step back and pull back to let's talk about why you believe that. What are the assumptions that we're working with here and what may need some revision going forward?
Yeah, I think that was a good question. I often, when I'm confronted with that, I always try to think about framing that strong point of view as one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what's another point of view? What other point of view can we take to try to just include it in a range of worldviews or ways that we're facing the future?
I love that. I think that's also another really incredible aspect of foresight is the multiplicity of it, right? I think there's always a way to say, what else? in that context, and I think that could be really useful in the conversation.
We have an interesting question that's asking for your thoughts on when working with governments, organizations in regions that are struck by devastation. That could be war or natural disaster. Do you think it's possible imagining the future in an adequately for the long run?
Wow, that's a really profound question. I want to say yes, but I don't want to be irresponsible by saying yes without having a lot of kind of ideas around how I might go about that. I do think it's yes. I do think that, and this is like, it kind of sparks my ideas around pulling in some of the design thinking, and also, you know, my background in social science and social science background as well, and really kind of mapping out the systemic and relational dynamic of a different, you know, different stakeholders, whether it's like government, like agencies, like citizens, other beneficiaries, potential victims in the system, and really understanding first and foremost what the relational dynamic and the ecosystem looks like. And I think within that, you could work to imagine many different futures, and selecting and nominating the preferred futures that you want to move towards and what that requires. I think the action taking could be quite difficult, but you could definitely do that. I can think of like some tools like, you know, I think IFTF also offers tools around finding your allies, building your network, doing small experimentations to get at, you know, the small questions that still reside within the ecosystem. And even things like, how do you name the resource that you need for different actors in the ecosystem? I feel like you could make progress. I want to say yes.
Yeah.
It does spark a lot of my ideas about different tools, but that's a really profound, good question.
Yeah. It really made me think of alternative futures. It's really a question of collapse. And what are there unique affordances of being in a collapse scenario, right?
Yeah. I like your perspective. I like the optimism of that. Yeah, that sounds great.
I think we ran through the questions. Let's see if there are any other questions. In the meantime, thank you so much, Ryoko. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you.
I knew from when you were responding, we had a little bit of a conversation on Vantage Point. I knew that you were a person that was going to be very thoughtful, and so I'm really happy to have been the one to interview you and host you.
I'm so glad.
We learned a lot today. So thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, I did as well. Thank you so much. I've been on the audience side of this seminar, so I'm really delighted to have been invited to be on this side.
It looks like we have one more question.
Okay.
The person is highlighting the difficulty or the challenge of fostering a culture of curiosity at organizations, which you're saying is a key ingredient, I'm guessing, for futures work. What are your thoughts about that? How do you foster a culture of curiosity?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is play. I think that I think the organization, you know, I belong to an organization that has a very long history, and organizations have done a really great job of kind of optimizing sameness, like optimizing routine, making sure things happen exactly the right way every single time. And I think that that also seeps into our culture as well. We want to, get at the same result every single time using the same method or whatever. And I do think that bringing in an element of play can be a really great way to catalyze a different approach to problem solving. Not just in terms of how you get at it, but like your feelings about it, your emotional kind of what you bring emotionally to problem solving as well. I really enjoy seeing people, being a little bit more lighthearted during a workshop. And that's why I bring a lot of physical element to it and sensory element to it. And, even our booklet, I think, if you get a chance to look at it, it has a lot of kind of a playful kind of vibe to it. So I would say play. I think also in terms of conversations that I've had with many different people within the organization, a lot of people see the limits of, centering technologies first and foremost, but they don't know what they're looking for. It's not necessarily foresight, they're looking for something different. And in that context, I think it's a great opportunity to bring something else into the picture. And foresight is definitely a great approach. Hybrid approach with design is also incredible. And yeah, engaging with them with a little bit of a lightheartedness and also modeling curiosity yourself in an organization, I would say is quite powerful too.
I think this relates to this question that came in. What's the future of foresight? What's the latest in your practice? And I'm already hearing, I'll let you answer it in a moment, but I'm already hearing a lot of based on our conversation, you said we definitely see from your example, foresight integrating sort of empathy and and probably ethics. And so that's kind of one of the ways that I see how, based on this conversation, a direction for foresight. I was trained as a policy analyst. So the role that I came in was like this analyst that analyzed data. But you're absolutely right. Now we definitely need to incorporate artist and play. And I was even inspired by people that do guided meditation as a way to kind of introduce and allow people to think about their own futures or their organizational futures 10 years out. There's a way to guide people prompts so that it isn't as scary or overwhelming. So I think there's a lot that's changing at the edges, but what do you think is the future of foresight?
Future of foresight. Very meta question. Me personally, like I said, I've been doing research in sustainability, and I've been working with foresight, and I have been researching AI ethics. And personally, for me, they were all three separate projects to begin with, and they all started to converge. Or maybe I've just been doing it too long or something, but like they all started to converge together into one big bucket of I don't really see anymore the difference between like sustainability and ethics. Like what is ethical is what is sustainable at the same time. Yeah. And in order for me to get at that reality, like you were just saying, Rod, like I think to be able to imagine that future, I think, in our culture, like, just broad mainstream culture, but also engineering culture, we tend to be very all or nothing. We either make it this way or we don't. And if you don't, then how? Whereas I think futures thinking offers so many different possibilities of getting at that. And as I'm learning more about sustainability, I just think that foresight could be just such an incredible tool in allowing us to imagine different realities. Not just, are we going to stop living the way we do, but how do we want to live 20, 30 years from now? So from my perspective, I'm having a vision of foresight as something that is really foundational to our path to sustainability and a path to ethical technology and ethical futures. But I don't know, that would be my answer, but I think that is partly because all those three are starting to meld together in my mind.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, and I look forward to another opportunity for us to have a conversation sometime soon.
Yeah,
Um,
me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we close, I'm just going to share one slide with everyone. We have another Foresight talk coming up. This is in the arena of higher education. And you can see here that's going to be January 24th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So please mark your calendars. It's going to be hosted by my colleague, Sarah Skaversky. And we're going to be hearing more about this program of applying foresight and innovation in higher education. So please look out for that. If you'd like to learn more about our courses, here's some contact information. My colleague Aicha will be sharing more about this presentation and the recording and a few of the links that came up. And you can always reach out to me directly if you have any questions about IFTF. Again, thank you so much, Ryoko, and thank you
Thank
all,
you.
our IFTF community, for joining us today. Have a great day.